This is Wild Turkey's Russell Reserve 15, and it really doesn't need much of an introduction if you've been paying attention to the bourbon world the past 2 years. When this thing came out at $250 in 2024, Whiskey Tube went crazy. All the reviewers that I watch very quickly were astounded by it and suggested that it might end up becoming Whiskey of the Year. I was lucky enough to try it before it was actually formally anointed by most of them 2024's Whiskey of the Year. And again, for those who didn't anoint it Whiskey of the Year, it ranked up there. It ranked up there, you know, in the top 3, the top 5 for most of the whiskey tubers out there. And a lot of folks didn't get a chance to try it. They were hoping that it would actually come down off of secondary because although released at $250, like I said, it was actually then selling at the time because of all the hype around it, multiples of the $250. And a lot of folks thought it would actually come down in price, but it hasn't. 2 years later, if you look online, you're going to see this thing is going for somewhere between $800 to $900 a bottle. Hard to find, but I'll tell you, and this is the point of this video today, why if you haven't gotten it yet and you do want to get a bottle of it, I think the time to get it is now. The prices on this are never going to come down. And if you've got a friend who's got a bottle and you want to get a sample of it to try it, I think you should do what you can to get your hands on a sample of it. So as I said, the whiskey tubers of our bourbon sphere, they love this whiskey, and you're probably going to ask yourself, well, why did I not use a Glen? Well, this particular whiskey, if you had a chance to try it, while the nose is absolutely incredible, it's really all about the finish. The finish on this is one of these legendary finishes, and this is one of the reasons why it's become so popular. We're going to do things a little bit differently today. I'm going to use my notebook, because I think it's important for you, and I want to make sure I get all my facts right, but I think it's important for you to get from this video, I guess, part of the reasons why I think this whiskey is just never going to come down. I mean, in my mind, this thing is comparable to the cheesy gold foil, the split label, the pewter top, the donut, etc. as far as the hype. Now, the difference between those and this one is those were regular releases, and if you look at those online, you're going to see that the prices for those on secondary as collectibles today are through the roof. Now bear in mind, this wasn't your regular release. This wasn't just a pretty bottle or some, let's say, fancy packaging to try and get the product sold. I think Eddie Russell, Master Blender, we're going to talk about him a bit at length later on. He knew what he had on his hands. And I believe that Wild Turkey priced this at a point that they thought would keep it out of secondary because it was staggering. I mean, bear in mind, this is the same juice that becomes the Wild Turkey 101. So this is, you know, the really reliable product that we all know and love, Wild Turkey 101, which is not a bottom shelf whiskey, but it's like just above it. And essentially what they did is they left it for 15 years as opposed to 6 to 8, which is what they say the batches are of your modern Wild Turkey. And instead of proofing it down to 101, they only dropped it to a rather interesting and very precise 117.2 proof. Now, it's 15 years old, sure. And one of the things that this product has in it, it was a batch. And I want to talk a little bit about batches in a second, but I'll tell you about the makeup of what we understand this release actually was. So it was 75% 15-year-old barrels from Camp Nelson C and 25% of 16-year-old barrels from the same rickhouse. Now bear in mind that rickhouse was then subsequently demolished, right? So we're not going to be able to get, let's say, the same product out of that rickhouse now moving into the future. And I don't know the status of construction, what they're doing with that particular space. I'm assuming they're making a larger rickhouse. And some of you who are watching this might actually know. You can put it down in the chat because I think it would be helpful for me to also get the learnings from there. But versus a lot of single barrels, and by the way, a lot of folks went crazy for Wild Turkey single barrels, particularly in 2025, me being one of them. But this is a batched product, so bear in mind this is a batched product. This isn't expecting something magical out of the wood in a particular barrel that somebody selected, and you get a chance to try that, because while that is fun, I think there's something much more complicated, much more along the lines of art, that someone like an Eddie Russell, they're some of the few people who can actually do this. The way the legend goes is that the majority, the average evaporation rate of the barrels that they put into this blend was 68%, with some of them containing as few as 17 gallons in those barrels. And I believe the barrels are 50 something. I think they're 50 or 55, something along that level. But can you imagine 68% evaporation level, some of them only having 17 gallons left, and they dumped 15-year-old and 16-year-old from this rickhouse to make, or rather from that area, from Camp Nelson, and put them into this particular batch, okay? And they blended it. If you do the math on that, there were somewhere north of 900 barrels, close to 1,000 barrels that were used to make this blend, this incredible blend. And they released, the numbers, they varied. What folks were saying initially, they said 50,000, 60,000. I think the final release, from the information I was able to gather, again, from the world of Whiskey Tube, was somewhere around 80,000 bottles were produced. That is a big release. That's a big release for an LE. And yet, the prices really haven't come down. You can still find them. You got to do a little bit of hunting. I think it's very rare you're going to find them in a liquor store unless it's one of these museum type liquor stores, but you can certainly find them online. As I mentioned before, super high price. But let me talk a little bit about Eddie Russell, and I'm going to refer back to my notebook here for a second. So obviously he is the son of Jimmy Russell, legendary master distiller Jimmy Russell. And Eddie's son, Bruce, is the fellow who is now the heir apparent, obviously, to Eddie in this role as master distiller. But Eddie started at Wild Turkey back in 1981. Okay, he has been at this for over 45 years, or about 45 years now. So 1981, and he started, even though he was Jimmy's son, he started at, if you would call this, if you talk about org structure today, he started at the bottom to learn all the basic jobs and understand all the jobs that go into whiskey making before he was given this control. Now, of course, those of you who've been following this family, the Russells, you know all about Jimmy's preference for whiskey and how he thinks 8 years is probably the best because he finds it over oaked. Bear in mind, they used to make whiskey a little bit differently then. They also had a very different barrel entry proof. And Eddie likes things perhaps a little bit older, but not necessarily at a super high proof. This is a fascinating one because this, at the time, I believe this was the highest proof that they had ever done, 117.2, which is rather precise. If you think about Eddie Russell and his palate, what it would take to do this, I'm sure there were a series of samples that they went through before they decided that the watering down, by the way, barrel entry proof I believe is 115, so it's not barrel proof, okay? It was a little bit higher than the barrel proof at 117 again, 0.2, which is rather precise. And I think it's only someone like an Eddie Russell who could make a product like this, a blend like this, that is this absolutely incredible. It hits everything you would want in a whiskey. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk to you next about who some of these people that I follow are, who ranked it as high as they did and why. And then what I did is I also pulled a number of their notes, because it's not just my notes, right? I don't get all the same notes that they get. Of course, everybody's palate is a little bit different. Everybody's nose is a bit different. There are all these variations, as people say, about what you ate, your rest, etc. My point is, this is an incredibly complex, layered bourbon, but the real gem on this thing is the finish. So while the nose is absolutely fantastic and layered, the front of the palate, the mid palate, the back of the palate, the way it envelops your tongue, the mouthfeel, that finish is super long. So for me, it was, it was Mash and Drum, it was Bourbon Junkies, SLB Drinks, Bourbon Kingdom, ADHD Whiskey, Bourbon Judge, Brad's Bourbon Reviews, Fred Minnick, of course, Bourbon Retriever, Bourbon Drop, It's Bourbon Night, and T-Rod Whiskey. I mean, these guys all have had their particular reviews on this, and they all said pretty much the same thing as far as the quality of this particular bourbon. And all that did is, obviously back in, let's say 2024, people were still hunting and going crazy for a number of bourbons. So any LEs were hitting secondary market immediately upon release with some type of multiple. But in many cases, like they are today now in late April of 2026, some of them come down on the secondary. This didn't. This actually, I think, immediately went to about 350, 400, and then started shooting up. Now, I am a member of the Miami Bourbon Society as well as the Fort Lauderdale Whiskey Society, and our group, at least MBS, was invited to one of these tastings of Wild Turkey. So we got to try a number of legendary picks, which I have written down in a notebook somewhere. I actually forget what they are, but I did talk about some of them. So there was a cheesy gold foil there. I think there were 2 split labels. There was a donut. I haven't had the pewter one yet, but in our price of admission, which included some dinner, it also included a bottle of the Russell's Reserve 15. So we got to taste it that night and then also go home with it. And I'm really, really grateful that we were able to do that, because while it was at 400, as we got towards the back end of 2024, and everyone started saying that it might be the best whiskey that they were able to taste in 2024, and then ultimately anointing it best whiskey of 2024 or best bourbon. Wow, I mean, the prices, as I said, they haven't come down. They've disappeared off of most of the shelves. I actually have never seen them even in a museum store. So at the time, being a turkey fan, one of the things that I did is I went and I got myself a backup. So while this one has some damage in it, I've got a backup because, again, as I said, I think that this is one of these products that is only going to be a legendary pour, and I think it's worth getting your hands on. So what are some of the notes? What are some of the notes they said? And bear in mind, this is your traditional, as I said before, your Wild Turkey 101 mash bill, your 75 corn, your 13% rye, your 12% malted barley. And I'll talk about that for a second, because everyone always says the Wild Turkey funk or that turkey funk. I kind of get a little tired of hearing about the turkey funk. I mean, to me, it's pretty basic, right? In that you're mixing that rye and that bourbon, which is, let's say, it's a significant amount of rye at 13%, which lends some of that spiciness and that citrus note that a lot of people get on the Wild Turkey, but it's a significant amount of barley as well. And a lot of guys that drink bourbon, many of them actually don't like single malt whiskeys or malted barley whiskeys. But Wild Turkey actually has quite a bit in it. It's got that 12%. You mix that rye with that higher amount of barley than what you would normally find in a typical bourbon, and you're gonna get that earthiness to it, that Wild Turkey funk. So for me, I think I'm gonna call it that barley rye mixture to it. But what are the notes? So a lot of the folks, they say on the nose, they say things like toasted caramel or almost burnt caramel. Obviously, it's spicy from the rye, etc., but also the oak, right? There's a significant amount of oak presence right through the middle of this on your palate. Right through the middle makes a great backbone. Some people get raisins on it. Some people will get a sense of either plums, which I think I lean a little toward plum. Some guys get a hint of a prune or an espresso, or some guys get like a cocoa powder. But I think you get that more on the palate. They talk about, obviously, sweet oak, and it's true. It's truly sweet oak. This is a sweet bourbon that then, on the finish, it then morphs into a dryness. There is a deep, let's say, deep, dark notes of dark fruits. As I mentioned, in addition to the plums, also cherry, vanilla. Let's say a darker note, darker cherries. Some people say like those alcohol-soaked or brandy-soaked cherries. Some people get cloves on the mouth. It's oily, it's rich, it's coating, it's thick. Some guys get a touch of tea, particularly on the swallow. So in other words, as it gets to the back end of the palate. Some folks get a charred orange peel or cigar wrapper note, espresso. There's clearly like that peppery note, and I'm going to go with a white pepper as opposed to a black pepper. And some folks get a hint of mint or a hint of licorice on the finish to remind you that there's rye in the mash bill. I don't get the mint, I don't get the licorice, but I do get that espresso note, that let's say that cigar wrapper tobacco leaf type of note, particularly on the finish. And as it goes in, you get your little bit of a Kentucky hug, obviously accented by the rye that's present in it with this long finish. I mean, this could be almost a minute later, you're still feeling that. So let's get into it. Let's do like a little bit of a sip and a sample. I'll add to it, let's say a hint of brown sugar and that cocoa. Um, First sip of the day, even though it's late on a Friday, but what an incredible whiskey. What an incredible whiskey. So what I would suggest to you is if you haven't had it and you've never gotten around to getting a taste of it, find somebody in one of these whiskey groups that you might be a member of or local to you. If you happen to find a bar that's got this available, get yourself a pour. It's worth tasting. As I mentioned, it's going on secondary now for about $900. So I think if you can get a pour at $50 for an ounce, I think that's actually pretty reasonable. And I might go as high to get the experience on this if you've never had it, maybe as high as 75, 80, which by the way, that's a ton of money for a sip of whiskey. And let's be clear, okay? I'm advocating that you go out and get it for the experience, which is what Citizen of the World is about, right? Life is short, so my memento mori over here is to remind us that life is short and life is about experiencing as much as you can. So get that experience. That's what you're paying for. You're not paying for the bottle of whiskey. You're paying for the experience of that whiskey and being able to share it. But there is no real whiskey when you think about it that's really worth $250 or $300. But another argument is, as the capitalist in me would say, is, something is worth what other people are willing to pay for it, right? Or even what you're willing to pay for it. So is it worth it? I think so. I mean, I think if I'm telling you like a cheesy gold foil or one of these split labels or the old, I think it's called what, Kentucky Spirit. If you try one of those bottles and people are willing to pay $1,600 for that, this is only going to go up, as I'm telling you. This is going to go up. 20 years from now, people are going to be talking about the Russell's Reserve 15 from 2024 and how it was amazing. Now, I'm not saying that they're never going to release another Russell's Reserve 15, much like they did the 13, right? So there's a number of 13s out there. I think it's 5 at this point. This would have been, a lot of folks thought it would have been the third year, but instead of doing a 13, they went straight ahead to a 15. Each of the 13s is different. And I think there's something magical about that Camp Nelson and the profile of the barrels that are aged there. I mean, in this blend that I was talking about before, in this blend, they say that there were barrels in there that were hazmat, that they were about 150 proof. That's pretty hot. Now, obviously, this is 117.2, but Wild Turkey doesn't really release product that hot. So to be able to take that quality, that rare, that special of a barrel, let's say a 16-year, a 15-year, etc., and make this blend. I mean, you have to imagine what this was. This is almost 1,000 barrels, right? To make a blend that has a profile that's as beautifully balanced as this, that hits everything you would ever want in a well-aged bourbon. I mean, I think it's great. I mean, people go crazy. For example, some of these Van Winkle's or Pappy products, right? I think those are also good. Those are let's say they've earned their reputation. But as a 15-year, I mean, I think I'll take this over some of those others, and especially at the price, it's actually a bargain versus some of the others even on secondary. I think it's incredible. I'll give you another example. If I had a choice between this and maybe a GTS, and I know a lot of people go crazy over a GTS, and I've had some that are actually really fantastic, but you really never know what you're going to get year for year over the GTS, even though those are also batched. This was amazing. This was amazing. This continues to be amazing. I've had the bottle obviously for 2 years now, and you noticed probably at the very beginning when I took the parafilm off the top. So I have a lab background, chemist by training, so what I usually do is I seal them a bit. But yeah, it is going to oxidize, so I'll probably have to transfer this to a smaller bottle. You want less headspace, you want less air over time. I mean, I'm not going to get through this anytime soon, but what an amazing bottle. So again, citizens of the world, go out, try something like this. Get yourself a pour of the Russell's 15. Get yourself that experience so that 20 years from now, when people are talking about, you know, $2,000, $3,000 bottle of Russell's 15 on the market, and people are reflecting back in the boom days of bourbon before everything went bust, before distilleries stopped distilling in 2026, and there were all these crazy discussions about takeovers of brands and whatnot. I mean, you can talk about remembering the time when you had your Russell's 15 and why those were the heydays of bourbon. Citizens of the world, get out, try something new. Cheers. I think it actually needs, even from the bottle, this is the kind of pour that needs about maybe 30 minutes in your glass to truly open up. Because once it opens up, the mouthfeel actually gets oilier. It coats much better, and it makes that transition into the dry finish that much more pleasurable, because it's such a contrast from that oily, juicy fruit turning into that more tannic, dry finish with this really spreading turkey hug in your chest. Fabulous whiskey. Cheers.